You're listening to the Mississippi Outdoors Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Wyatt. Got a question for you. If you have a problem with buzzards on your property, who do you call? What if a beaver is loose in the football stadium? Well, that's not just an idea. It's a true story. Someone who's dealt with that is Kris Godwin, our guest today on the podcast.
This episode of the Mississippi Outdoors Podcast is brought to you by the Foundation for Mississippi Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks.
You're listening to the Mississippi Outdoors Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Wyatt. Today, we have a guest who, if you've watched Mississippi Outdoors television over the last several years, you've seen her not only crappie fishing at Enid, but on squirrel hunts with her husband and Scooter and others. She is Kris Godwin with the USDA here on the show. Kris, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
I mentioned that crappie fishing trip on Mississippi Outdoors from a couple of years ago, and I caught some of that recently. Chip sent me the episode, and yeah, you and your husband, Dave, y'all caught them that day.
We did well. Yep, we sure did. It started slow, but it picked up once the sun finally came out. It was pretty foggy when we got going, but yeah. We usually do pretty well. We got the little luck charm with us, I think.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and full disclosure, if we wanted to do an entire show about crappie fishing with you, we'd have enough material. We could do it.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's one of my hobby passions. I love to fish. And so crappie fishing has been one of those things that we've, we get to do together as a couple. We only get to do it maybe once a week, but when we get to go, we try and do well. And then we can do fish fries for friends and, stuff like that. So it's fun, but it's a good time for us to spend some time together too and just kind of have fun.
Sure.
So.
And for those listening that need more of an introduction for you, you're with the USDA, Department of Agriculture, and have been for close to 33 years. Mm-hmm. And we mentioned Dave, your husband, who he was here at NBWFP for 25, 26 years. Yep. So like when you walked in the building today, there's a lot of people here you've known for a long time.
Yeah, there
right?
is. Yeah, there sure is. It's like a family reunion every time you walk in the door, just that now everybody's getting so much younger, having to relearn some things.
Sure.
And some people.
And some people for sure. Well, so that we can, again, we kind of get more of a background. You're in Starkville. Mm-hmm. You're at Mississippi State as an adjunct professor there now in Department of Wildlife and Fisheries. But not originally from Mississippi.
That's correct.
Long way from here originally, right?
Right. Yeah. So I grew up in New York State, but not, New York City. We grew up north around the Poughkeepsie area on the other side of the Hudson River. And so that area is nothing but apple orchards, peach orchards, cherries, plums, that kind of fruit for literally thousands of acres. So a lot of my friends were farmers growing up. My family, was associated with the farming business on and off. Grapes is another one that's real big in that area. So wineries, vineyards. And it was still north of West Point, where the military academy is as well. So, but yeah, and then my dad had a hunting camp up in the Adirondacks. So we'd go up there on weekends and do stuff. So yeah, my growing up years were pretty much outdoors doing fishing for the most part, but a little bit of hunting, but outside doing stuff most of the time.
And it was your dad that sort of introduced you.
Yeah. It's crazy looking back. My first inclination was about 5 years old watching Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. Right. And that kind of kicked it off. But, when you grow up and you're outside all the time, that just kind of developed that love and interest to stick with it as a profession. Yeah. It was either that or I was going to be, a professional flutist. So, because I was playing flute all the time. And I was like, which way? I want to be stuck in a room all the time playing a flute, or do I want to be outside? So it went the outdoor career. And
to college at Syracuse for undergrad.
Yep.
And then Mississippi for you came into the picture when you went to Mississippi State. And not only sort of, if I'm, judging it right from a distance, kind of found that career path that led you to here.
Yeah,
and found your husband.
Right. So Syracuse, my undergrad was in wildlife ecology. So, and it's really hard to get a job in wildlife in New York. It was just a bachelor's degree, and all my professors said, you got to go somewhere else for your master's. So, I applied at Mississippi State under Harry Jacobson, and Harry took me on. And it was, a great 2 years of working with this department on my master's degree because we were going around collecting deer, looking at reproductive tracts. So we were doing health checks and working check stations and stuff. And so that's really how I first got to know everybody here at the Department of Wildlife Fisheries, was through that experience. And just remained friends with a lot of those folks. And again, met Dave. He was working for Dr. George Hurst on a turkey project at Tallahassee. And the rest is history.
Yeah.
So
what was that transition like for you as a young person from New York to Mississippi?
That transition wasn't bad. It was when I left Mississippi State and went to South Mississippi was the harder transition, I think. South Mississippi was a little different. That was way pre-Katrina. And it took a while to adjust to the South Mississippi culture. But everybody down there, was pretty welcoming. And Dave, was working down there as well. So, we developed a lot of friendships from down that way.
Sure.
And then moved back to Starkville.
and are still there now.
We are still there now.
So for the last 25 years at USDA in wildlife services, describe for me, like, what is that relationship like, and what is sort of a purpose in that relationship for you in that role?
Okay. So USDA APHIS Wildlife Services, we are the federal entity that oversees human wildlife conflicts.
Okay.
So we're non-regulatory. We don't enforce any laws or anything like that. If we, do anything, we've got to have your permission to be on your property or your business or whatever it is. I can't just see a problem and go act on it. We're only partially funded by the United States government. So in some ways we work like a private business where we do have to charge for some of the services that we provide. But overall, we work with a lot of different things. So we work with the catfish industry on fish eating birds. We work with all the airports in the state on permitting issues with the Fish and Wildlife Service. We do a lot of feral swine work. We do a lot of aerial gunning as part of that. A lot of disease surveillance with a variety of animals, pigs being probably the biggest one, but now with high path, we're doing some waterfowl sampling. The rabies surveillance program we've done for years with our national rabies program, making sure that rabies, land mammal rabies at least, doesn't come into Mississippi. Any given day, it's vulture calls have been a big one lately. Resident Canada geese has been starting to heat up. But then there's, somebody's got a snake in the house or a skunk under the house, or, you never know what's going to come on the other end of the phone. At one point I had a beaver in the football stadium at Mississippi State. So that was probably right after your time there.
Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. So that was an interesting morning because that was right at 8 a.m., the Starkville or the campus police calling saying, "Hey, Kris, we got a problem." And having to go down there and live catch a beaver. I'm on the phone with my trappers like, "Has anybody ever done this before?" And they're like, "Nope."
In a football stadium.
In the football stadium.
So did a beaver just wander into Davis Wade Stadium or someone placed it
Yeah, if you
there?
remember, we had that crazy junction before it was all straightened out. And the water, it was in November and there was just a ton of water. And so they probably came in off South Farm, got in the main part of campus, and somehow it ended up in the football stadium that morning. Yeah, so I had to go down there with a catch pole. And there was like 50 people already watching because everybody had been on the radio. It was like, "Hey, there's a beaver in the stadium."
But before cell phones?
Yeah.
Or else
Kind of
they would-
right when cell phones were starting up, but everybody had been all over on it. So it was just like the MSU police, were like, "Yeah, we can't do anything on this one." So it was like, oh man.
Yeah.
But yeah, ended up catching it. But it was getting educated real quick. Beaver growl, didn't know that. So that was my first experience
So
with
you
that.
were growled at by a beaver in Davis Wade Stadium.
Yeah.
A lot of people have, caught touchdowns in Davis Wade Stadium, but I only know of one who's caught a live beaver in Davis Wade Stadium, and that's you.
Yep.
So you mentioned something in there too, vulture calls. So in that area of human and wildlife conflicts, getting calls about vultures, what are we talking about there?
Yeah, so vultures are like rowdy teenagers. So they cause a lot of havoc, and they have a weird affinity for things like rubber, asphalt tile roofs. They will tear coax cable apart. The seam around your window in your car, they'll pull that out. They'll pull the windshield wipers off a car. Boat seats, tractor trailers. We've worked with different equipment companies that have had damage where they've tore up the seat off the tractor, an open air tractor. The rubber seal around the gear shift, they'll tear that out. They're just they just go crazy. And we haven't figured out why they have an affinity for that kind of stuff, but they do. And then you think about, too, with vultures is the association with death, bad things, so then you get those calls from people that are like, there's a lot of vultures in the cemetery. If the graves started coming up, we've had that before. The whole, like if they're around a casino, gamblers won't go in because they see the birds on top and they're like, bad luck.
Yeah.
So there's those kinds of things that go on too. We get those kind of calls associated with vultures.
Chip had one question, a good question, just a natural thought when you mentioned vultures have an affinity for that rubber, soft plastic type material. Is it for nesting? Do they take it back and put it in their nest? But you say no.
Yeah, they don't really make a nest. So, most of the time they're nesting on the ground. They may throw a few sticks or something in there, but no general material. So a lot of hunters will find them in their deer stands, in the box stands. And they'll have made a mess in those things and just reeks. When you get in the fall, you start cleaning everything out. They'll find out that they've had a vulture in there. I had one actually try and come in a box stand with me at one point, and I basically had to take the rifle and use it as a baseball bat to keep it from coming in. When they get acclimated or an affinity to a site, they're hard to get to move. It's like kicking you out of your house.
Yeah,
it's that same concept. So in order to get them to move, you've got to really stay at it. So, and they are protected by the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. So you can't kill them without a permit from the Fish and Wildlife Service. But you can harass them as long as you don't harm or injure. So we tell people, spray them with a water hose, bang pots and pans. If it's legal to use a bottle rocket, anything you can think of, cap guns, make the environment as unfriendly as you possibly can to get those birds to move. And it's going to take several weeks. It's not an overnight fix. And it's difficult, and trying to find, where they're roosting at so that we can try and see if there's a way to disperse them out of the roost and move them, somewhere else where they're not going to cause as many problems. And we think that they probably have multiple roost sites. So just because you move them from one doesn't mean they don't have another place to go. They probably do.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, this time of year, you got the young fledging, and like I said, they're just a bunch of rowdy teenagers causing havoc everywhere.
Yeah.
And so the last couple of weeks, we've had a lot of vulture calls.
Well, things like that, obviously, is something I had no idea. I didn't even know that about vultures. And I also, obviously, therefore, didn't know that someone at USDA is working with MDWFP to help people who may have a problem with that particular species. That's just one example, isn't it?
Right. Yeah. And I don't want to say that they're necessarily bad all the time. They do a lot of environmental cleanup. When you look at roadkill and things, I think they can be an indicator species for the health of an environment. But, there are times, like a lot of animals, they get in the wrong place at the wrong time, and that's when they're an issue. So
there's a bear story that's floating around out there. A lot of people here at MDWFP have known. What can you tell me about that bear story?
So we had done a workshop in Natchez, a feral swine workshop in Natchez, and we were going to we decided we were going to work came out, and I had my disease biologist at the time with me and a couple of people from the agency. And so we were out in the evening trying to get some pigs to do some disease sampling. And I had been on a food plot, and there had been pigs come next to me, but they never came out in the plot. And there was a trap set up right in the woods, right where I was sitting. I was on like a little woods road looking right into a food plot. There was a pig trap over here, and then there was some real thick woods on my left side, and that's where the pigs were. So told everybody about that. We kept it in the back of our mind. And this is right when thermal, had started coming available for use on rifles and ARs and all of that, those kinds of things. And so we had gone out that evening and that night, and we were, trying to collect some more pigs for sampling. Decided, well, let's go back to that spot. Now, this is getting to be about midnight, 1 a.m. at this point. We'd been up, for quite a while. And so my disease biologist was wearing an infrared light on his head. We had the scopes and all of that, and we're sitting in the road, and there's a pig out in the food plot. So he's like, go ahead and, shoot the pig. And I said, okay. And it was a big pig. So I take the shot, and I could hear it hit. And the next thing I know, my disease biologist is going, bear, bear. And I'm like, you said it was a pig. And he said, no, there's a bear in the trap. And so I swing the gun around with the thermal, and there's a bear inside that trap walking out, and it came somewhere between 10 and 15 yards right in front of us and walked right across us and went in the woods.
Wow.
And I'm laid out in the road at that point because there was a 10 to 15 second period there that I was convinced I had shot a bear, not a pig. And this is when bears were still federally protected.
Right.
And we'd been having a lot of, and I say we, the department, wildlife services, a lot of other groups were like, what do bear and pigs look like in thermal? And can you tell the difference? At that point, at that range, there was no doubt in my mind what the difference was. But, we went and found my pig, and it was a huge sow that was, about to have piglets and all of that. And I said, okay, we've got a bear in the vicinity. That's it. We're done for tonight, But it was one of those instances where you're like, holy crap, We talk about other people making that mistake, and this is us out here, professionals, doing this. And here's this bear that just walked right across us. And like I said, for us at that distance, real close, it was obvious what the difference was. But that's when we started, I had one of my employees actually went to the Jackson Zoo and took a picture of one of the bears in thermal. And so when you start seeing those, blackout images of a bear and a pig together, that's where all that came from, was making sure to try and educate the public on, you can tell the difference, but you need to remember all of your firearms training that you've been taught about, knowing your target, what's beyond the target. At night, you don't have all of that differential, and thermal things can be a little deceiving in terms of distance. So, it was one of those where it was like, holy crap, that was almost, am I going to prison?
Hair raising.
Yeah.
And, immediately after taking the shot too.
Yeah. Because he didn't, all he said was bear. He didn't say, it's to your left or to your right, and it was just like, oh man.
Yeah.
So.
And I would guess, okay, and the distance on that shot approximately to the pig, let's say, was what? Just
30, 40 yards at most. Yeah.
And then obviously when the bear appears, it's much closer.
Much closer.
And that's why you say, there you can obviously, see the difference. But it does raise the question that if there's inexperience involved.
If you're not thinking that you've got bears in your area, I mean, we never, even suspected we'd be up on a bear that night, And so, and now with bears, have been seen in various parts of the state, it's something that if you're going to do night shooting with thermal on pigs, you need to be aware of that possibility and always keep it in the back of your mind.
Wow.
So.
Bats. You also mentioned bats.
Bats are cool.
Another, for some, hair-raising topic. But you said bats are cool.
Yeah, they are. So we have roughly 15 species of bats in Mississippi. So we have some that are just forest dwellers you're never going to see. There's some that are endangered, probably not going to see a lot of those. But then we have a couple species that love to be inside structures, buildings. And that's largely the Brazilian or Mexican freetail and the big browns. Those are the two that you're typically going to run into inside a structure. And they get into, problems just like vultures where they're in a place and they don't want to come out. And they can be really difficult to work with. So, our agency, a lot of the private wildlife guys that are out there, we all try and do exclusion where you create one-way doors where they can get out, but they can't come back in. And years ago, a certain dormitory on a certain campus had issues with them that we got involved with. And it was an all-girls dorm, and they were on the top 2 floors within the walls. So between the brick outface and the cedar or the cement blocks, there was a gap in there. And the bathroom windows had never been fully sealed. So the bats were going straight into the bathroom in between those 2 structures. And so when you pulled the heating unit out of the bathroom wall and you looked up, it was just solid bats. And so at the time I had an employee who was a ropes instructor. And so we rappelled for 3 days off of that building, which was 6 stories, and did exclusion on all those windows to try and get those bats out. And then I was trying to do a lot of education at night with the girls in the dorm. They were convinced that the bats were coming up through the toilet because they'd found some in the toilets. And I'm like, no, what happened was the bats got trapped in the bathroom and got, found a water source and couldn't get up out of the toilet.
Yeah.
But this is where we go with education, and that education's a valuable thing, and trying to teach people that, some of the things you think aren't necessarily true, and bats can't come up through the toilet. And then those bats probably bombarded that facility for days on end trying to get back in, which they'll do with any facility that's like that. And it's just like trying to kick you out of your house. It's the same thing. They want back to where they know.
Right.
So
kind of like the vultures almost. It's really sort of a matter of like who's going to be harder headed over the long haul here,
right?
More stubborn, them or you,
right? Yeah, and you do have to take into account the human health and safety part of it, because some bats do have rabies, and so if you have a contact with a bat, we need to get try and get the bat if we can, but also get that person in for post exposure shots and things like that. But on the positive side, the insect eating ability of all bats is phenomenal. Mm-hmm. And so they're a much needed resource in the environment. And we just did a bat blitz over at Noxubee Refuge a couple of weeks ago where we were mist netting for the public and catching bats. And, that was a lot of fun. So, and I had a great time, working with a variety of agencies doing that. And so we saw some really cool bats, some that I haven't really gotten to see up close before.
Really?
Yeah. So there was a Seminole bat that we caught that I've never seen one that close. So I got educated too, along with the public on some of that. It was a neat experience.
That is cool. It's a cool name, Bat Blitz. But to think
it's actually a bio blitz, where you're looking for a whole bunch of species. But part of that was, we were kind of doing a little bat blitz and we have a Mississippi Bat Working Group that, is a variety of members from all over the state, that do mist netting events and things like that. So,
yeah. Honestly, Kris, there have been times on this podcast with other folks from NBWFP and different programs, whether it's Fisheries or, turkey program, Adam, talking deer. And I'll have this aha moment where I look at someone and go, how cool is it that you do that for a living? Like you do that, that's your job. And as I listen to you talk and tell some of the stories and things you do, I would think for you at some point there had to be a moment where you went, this may be the coolest job there is. Really?
I have a lot of those. I am blessed that I have a phenomenal staff, and they're probably a lot more knowledgeable than I am. So, I go out with them and they teach me all the time, and they're really patient with me because I don't necessarily know everything. And now I've been in administration so long that I've kind of lost my biology edge, so to speak. So, when I get kind of tired of being in the office, I get to go out in the field and play. For them, it's not necessarily play, but we've done some cool stuff. I've gotten to work with a lot of amazing people, gotten to travel around the country and see some amazing stuff. There's not, the stories, obviously, after 33 years, you put you learn a lot of them and you get a lot of them and they keep adding up. But overall, it's been a great career, a lot of fun.
Yeah. So wildlife human conflict and interaction. Mm-hmm. We talk a little bit about just some examples, a few examples of that. You mentioned like with the bat story in the dorm, there's a public education element to it too. And then another part for you and for the department, diseases and dealing with and researching and approaching those. Give us a little taste of kind of what that arm is like for you.
Yeah. So when I first started with APHIS, the rabies surveillance program was in place. And so Mississippi hasn't had land mammal rabies since about the 40s from what we can find in the records. Okay. Now bats, it's endemic. We know we have it in bats, but like in raccoons, fox, skunk, we haven't been able to find it. But Alabama has it within 35 miles of the Mississippi border. So we've continued that rabies surveillance, even till today. We're still doing, we pick up roadkill raccoon and we're able to test those and react to animals that are turned in by the public that may be suspect. Because sometimes you get stuff that a lot of times it's distemper and not rabies. And then West Nile hit, and so we were doing stuff with West Nile, and then high path avian influenza, has come and gone a couple different times. But this last round, it's kind of stuck around. And so we do a lot of hunter harvest surveillance where, we get with hunters that have harvested ducks and we can take samples off of those. And we do that with the department, with Houston Havens and some of the waterfowl staff. And that has been an early sentinel to the poultry industry in Mississippi that, hey, this disease is here. You know, you guys, if you haven't stepped up your biosecurity, it's time to do that. And we work with the Board of Animal Health, our sister agency, Veterinary Services, with all of that. And then our disease biologist he's been detailed literally all over the country right now, doing a lot of work with high path, because now we have found in dairy cattle. So it's not staying in birds, it's jumping into other species. And so where does it go from here? And what does that mean from a human health perspective?
Yeah.
And that's the concern right now with high path. So there's a lot of attention being paid to high path avian influenza.
Well, and, you know, I go back to that word we mentioned really early in our conversation, purpose, you know, the purpose behind something. Well, for you and others that you work with, it's really obvious because it's a big deal. We're talking major food source thing. And it's a matter of all these years and decades of experience and research going into knowing how to approach it and trying to stay ahead of it.
Right.
Right.
You know, and just because we're USDA doesn't mean we stick just with agriculture. You know, we're looking at human health and safety from a wider standpoint. You know, we're protecting property, you know, natural resources as well, endangered species protection, you know, all of that kind of falls within our congressional mandate. So, you know, it's a little bit broader than just agriculture, although with high path right now, it is, you know, a little bit more agricultural focused because it is affecting, you know, dairy obviously is a huge agricultural sector.
Sure.
You know, across the United States, even here in Mississippi, there's still some dairy left. So make sure that we protect those guys, give them a heads up. You know, this is what we're seeing, you know, and these are some things to start working with all of our counterparts on to make sure we protect that resource.
Yeah. You mentioned, I'm jumping back here, you mentioned the raccoons and the rabies. You're a baseball fan. I mean, being in Starkville, it stayed as long as you could not be a baseball fan.
That's right.
A couple of years ago, it was actually a baseball game at Arkansas, in their home stadium in Fayetteville. And a raccoon entered the stadium, was in the stands, in the seating area. And a fan there, very famously, it kind of went viral on the internet, picked him up.
I remember that.
Picked up the raccoon by the nape of the neck, held him up. He became internet famous. And whether or not there was a bite or not, I know it was close enough that there were interviews done with this particular guy afterwards, and he had to go through the whole process of rabies shots, which is a long, drawn-out process for someone that comes in contact.
Yep.
And I'm assuming that would be the same in the state of Mississippi, even though it hasn't been detected. Is that right?
Yeah. So any animal that is a possible rabies vector, if you have a bite or any kind of, you know, interaction where there could be rabies transmission, then we really encourage them to get with the health department and go through that post-exposure series, which now I think is 3 shots over a month period of time. It's not like it used to be, where it used to be like 7 or 14 in the stomach kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You know, and those of us that work with it, you know, we get the pre-exposure, which, you know, is several shots. And then we get our titers checked every two to 3 years. So I just had my titer check, and it's, you know, really high. So that's why I could handle the bats. But yeah, you don't want to take a chance with rabies, because rabies is 100% preventable, but it's 100% fatal if the symptoms come on. And so that's what we try and impress to people, is that you don't want to get to that point. You know, let's not take a chance.
Yeah.
Because most people that come down and start getting symptomatic with rabies don't recover. So.
Well, so there's so many things that we've covered so far in the work aspect for you and in your career at USDA and in partnership with MDWFP. But what about the fun? Because we've seen you crappie fishing on Mississippi Outdoors, squirrel hunting, and other things. So for you and your husband as a couple, kind of what's fun outdoor activity number one for you guys?
For me, it's the fishing.
Okay.
You know, I've always loved to fish. You know, we went ahead and invested in a boat that would last, and we could bring friends on and learn. And we crankbait. You know, and we being in Starkville, you can get to Grenada, you can get to Enid, you can get to Sardis. You know, we love going down to Okeechobee. So within a couple hours, you know, we can leave and get someplace and get back home at a reasonable time. And to me, it's just fun. It's our one day where we can just, you know, go have an enjoyable day on the water together. don't have to worry about anything. If we catch fish, great. If we don't, that's fine too at this point. At first, when we first started, catching fish was important. Now that, 10, 12 years has gone by, getting fish is great, but, now I need the downtime. I need my time away from the computer and the phone and all of those things. And the kids are kind of on their own, so I don't have to worry about them. The only thing I got to worry about is somebody making sure we get home in time to take care of the dogs. Because the squirrel dogs, they don't like staying inside very long. So, number two, now that the kids have grown up, we've started turkey hunting together, which that's only been within the last 5 years or so. And I'm one and done. Turkey hunting's been Dave's passion since he was in grad school.
Yeah.
And to the point where I always used to tell people that we had a 6-week divorce period during turkey season. So, that we've gotten past all of that now and we've enjoyed that. And we bought, some property that, we're kind of trying to get fixed up. We've, our whole career has been telling other people how to manage their property. Now we've, got a place that we can, kind of preach the practice.
Yeah.
And that kind of thing. So, and I deer hunt. I love to deer hunt, and again, it's not so much about getting the deer as it is away from everything and just having that downtime.
Yeah,
so,
sure.
Outdoor recreation. Yeah. I've got the whole year planned out. We go from deer season in October and then it goes into squirrel season on and off, into turkey season, into my fishing, and then we just circle right on back around again. So,
which is one of the great things about the state of Mississippi, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the recreational opportunity for hunting and fishing is phenomenal. I mean, how many other states can you say you can do that in?
Year round.
Yeah. I mean, it's just nonstop. You can take advantage of it, and it's just, we have the public resources, available for it, and Dave and I both are real into youth education too. So trying to take kids out that have never squirrel hunted with the dogs before, because you can put kids in with dogs and make all the noise you want and still get, a bag of squirrels, and you're showing them, you might see a flying squirrel, there's an eagle flying around, or, you pick up a shed antler or something, you can do all kinds of things with them and they can rip and roar and make noise. And, the dogs are out there barking and they're, they're our family pets. So they sleep with us at night too, and so they're, adjusted to being, around kids, and the kids love them, and, just a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So,
well, and upstate New York is gorgeous.
Yep.
But we don't have to deal with the snow.
Right. Right. Not most times.
Yeah. Most of the time.
Most of the time we don't get the snow. And it's not miserable to hunt here. I mean, it gets cold here. Don't get me wrong. The humidity factors in there. And, we do get nights when it gets down in the teens, and it can be cold to deer hunt. But you don't have that snow factor that you're trying to figure out.
Yeah, for sure. Kris, it's great to get to meet you, talk to you, and I'm sure we'll get to do that again. And maybe next time you and Dave together, or maybe you interview him or he interviews you. That would be good too. So thanks.
Dave has a lot of stories. So
yeah.
But thank you for having me. I appreciate being here. It's been fun.
Yeah, it's been fun for us too. Thank you all for listening to the Mississippi Outdoors Podcast with Kris Godwin from the USDA. We'll see you outdoors.